We talk about the four largest economic blocks in the world. The politicians are telling us they're going to print more money. The banks are telling us they're going to lend more money to whatever it is the industries are that the politicians want them to lend to. This is inflationary. I think ETH can go to 10,000 easily by the end of the year. Tom Lee is doing, Satoshi's work, going out there and proselytizing the unwashed masses about the bright future of Ethereum. He's red pilling an entire cohort of investors, which is great. But at the end of the day, right, the ETH story, ETH is still massively underperformed, given where a lot of other layer ones have been this cycle, and I think it's going to play catch up. I'm still $250,000 Bitcoin. That's my end of year target.
In today's video, Arthur Hayes breaks down his bold macro view for 2025. A world where every major economy is printing money and Bitcoin becomes the ultimate winner. From Washington to Beijing, Arthur sees the same playbook. Politicians promising discipline while quietly unleashing credit. The result? Massive liquidity, rising inflation, and a setup for Bitcoin to surge toward $250,000, with Ethereum chasing $10,000. He also explains why the famous 4-year Bitcoin cycle no longer applies, and how a new credit-driven era is rewriting crypto's future. Stick around as Arthur lays out what this global reflation means for markets, and why crypto may be the only safe escape.
The thing everyone wants to know is, what is this deal that Trump and Xi are going to get involved in? I don't know what it's going to be. Both sides will spin it as it was a positive development to their own domestic audiences, and then it'll be back to the status quo, which is China printing ever larger export surpluses, right? The last month was another record high in terms of China's export earnings. So the situation globally is not really changing that much. But if you think about the American voters, they don't want a trade war. They're not happy about paying more for shit at Walmart. That's not really going to help Trump win an election. What's going to help Trump win an election is putting more brown people in jail using ICE, right? Americans love that shit. So he'll keep doing that. And then not Canada, but China, again, they're going to spin this as, we stood up tall for the Chinese people, and, we're doing good for China, right? And again, status quo. So I don't think anything is really going to change, but once we get over that sort of early November hump, then it's smooth sailing, right? Because both sides have done a deal, and so now they can both forget about it. And, all the bad things because of these imbalances that are created in both economies can sort of be swept under the rug, being like, yeah, I dealt with that. We met, we have a deal, whatever that is. And so let's move on. And so what happens
if a deal doesn't happen in November?
Then, I think at the end of the day, the same thing will happen as what happened in April of this year, right? Trump talked tough and he had a taco, because at the end of the day, the financial position of America doesn't lend itself to being super aggressive in these sorts of things. And he's a master at sort of PR. He'll revert to status quo. And however he does that, and however he Jedi mind tricks his base that the status quo is different than what it actually is, fine. That's he's a true politician. He can do that. And again, the same. China still prints massive export surpluses. They still selectively restrict who gets rare earths. The U.S. pretends like everyone needs NVIDIA chips, and that's their crutch. And then we all continue to play the same game.
Okay, so the show goes on no matter what.
Correct.
What does that mean for Bitcoin end of year? Where do you think that takes Bitcoin?
I'm still $250,000 Bitcoin. That's my end of year target.
End of year. I said 240 at the beginning of the year, so you and I we're in the same boat here. And do you still feel like that's likely? Like, we're time is ticking here, Can we really get there by the end of the year? What would be your probability on that?
50-50, as much as any prediction that I make.
At least you're honest.
At least it's directionally correct, right? If we get there, we get there. The money is going to be printed. Every day there's another article which confirms, there will be more credit created, whether that's in the United States, in Japan, in China, in the European Union. They're all doing the same stuff. They're all tackling different issues in their respective economies, but the solution is always print more money. And so if Bitcoin double or more than double in 2 months? Absolutely. We've done it before, right? And if you're a believer of this, there's only so much Bitcoin on the exchanges, and once whoever wakes up and starts buying, it's just one of these charts because there's no available supply. Whatever you want to believe, So it's definitely possible. So we could definitely double in under 3 months.
Altcoins, not all altcoins go up. So obviously if Bitcoin goes to 250, then altcoins are going to do well. There's no doubt about that. What's your thoughts on, let's say, ETH first and then the rest of the altcoins?
So yeah, I think ETH can go to 10,000 easily by the end of the year. I think Tom Lee is doing, Satoshi's work, going out there and proselytizing the unwashed masses about the bright future of Ethereum as held by the BitMine digital asset treasury company. So, he's red pilling an entire cohort of investors, which is great. I hope they keep buying stuff. But at the end of the day, right, the ETH story, ETH is still massively underperformed given where a lot of other layer ones have been this cycle. And I think it's going to play catch up. I still like the price chart and fundamentals of Ethereum doing, 10,000 by the end of the year.
I also like the sounds of that. Now, what's hard is right now there is loud voices on both sides because, and a big reason there's loud voices on both sides is the 4-year cycle, which doesn't have a ton of cycles to make it necessarily statistically significant. But for better or for worse, everybody in crypto loves to talk about the 4-year cycle. If that played out, then we would peak in Q4. Some people saying the top is already in. What's your thoughts on the 4-year cycle? So you think we're going to do well through the rest of this year, but how do you think the rest of this cycle plays out? And any view on how long it goes and when you might be able to see the top? I know the top is very difficult to predict, but are you believing that it goes into late 2026, 2027 even? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, so every 4-year cycle, and there's been 3, right, since Bitcoin's been created, have coincided with a change in price of money, quantity of money in the US and China. And that was a chart study that I did in my Long Live the King essay. So if we come to this particular situation and if we were adherents to the 4-year cycle, then we would say, okay, well, this cycle is essentially a derivative of the depletion of the reverse repo program at the Fed, which is $2.5 trillion. Started with Bad Girl Yellen in 2022, ending with Buffalo Bill Besant basically now. It's basically at zero. And so if you were in this 4-year cycle, like, okay, cool. Like, there's no more liquidity. That's empty. Where are they going to get all this new money to pump up the markets? Let's examine what is happening right now. So the Fed is cutting rates, and Powell said last night there are more cuts to come, right? And this is while inflation is above their target. The U.S. is printing 3+% real GDP. Unemployment is at historic lows for the United States in a post-World War II scenario, yet they're cutting rates. Okay. Inflation flying my ass. And then he said, quantitative tightening is done. Motherfucker, you printed $5 trillion over the last 5 years, and you've reduced maybe the balance sheet by what? 2 trillion, something like that?
Not
I don't know
5.
what the number is. Not 5. So what are we talking about here? It is not time for quantitative. Your balance sheet should be 0. Talk to you when you're at 0, not when you're at whatever it is, 4 trillion, 5 trillion, whatever the Fed balance sheet is. So again, stopping quantitative tightening, quantitative easing is right around the corner. On the bank credit side, this is something that Besant has been badgering on about, that take away money creation from the Fed, put it in the hands of the commercial banks. JP Morgan announced recently a $1.5 trillion initiative. Most of that $1 trillion is based on we will lend more to American industry. Basically, let's help Trump drop more bombs. So we're going to build some more bombs. We're going to help you build some more bombs by lending some more money, right? So if Jamie Dimon's doing it, then Bank of America is going to do it, Wells Fargo is going to do it, Citibank's going to do it, because they're all lemmings. Jamie Dimon is a leader of all the large U.S. banks. So they're going to create more credit. So we have the Fed and the banking system forecasted to create credit. We have Trump talking about a housing emergency, wants to unlock, I think there's something like 10 trillion of home equity based on house price appreciation in the US. What is he going to do? He's going to convince the American public to spend their housing credit card on more gadgets, is essentially the game. So they feel good about themselves. Cool, whatever. Again, more money printing, more nominal GDP growth, more inflation. And if we move over to China, what's the message from China? It's, a reflationary story. They think that they want to be able to do it in a better way, not go crazy like 2008 and 2015. We'll see how she does that. But at the end of the day, they're signaling support for the housing market. It'll be tepid support. Support for social programs, and essentially reducing supply of goods, rationalizing supplies to get prices to go up. Again, this is reflationary. This is more credit being created in China. So if the two major parts of the world forecasted to create more credit, and this is what's coming out of the bankers and the politicians' mouths. We move over to Japan. I can't pronounce her name correctly, but the new prime minister in waiting is an Abenomics fanatic. She wants to print more money, tell the BOJ stop hiking rates, and that's how she's going to combat inflation. You're just going to hand out checks to people. Again, doesn't work, doesn't matter. More yen being created. And then if we move over to the European Union, if we take a look at how, I forgot his name, the prime minister who left, then was reappointed. To get his budget through, he essentially had to throw out the pension reforms that Macron almost died on a political cross of a few years ago with a Gilets jaunes pseudo-revolution. He said, no more, we're going to scrap those age restrictions. I forgot what it was. I think they reduced it by 2 years or something like that. So printing more money. And this is France. They're so fucked. I wrote an essay called Bastille Day about how fucked their finances are. And they're going back on previous promises to sort of rectify the situation because nobody wants to go into austerity. Everyone wants to print more money. So we talk about the 4 largest economic blocks in the world. The politicians are telling us they're going to print more money. The banks are telling us they're going to lend more money to whatever it is the industries are that the politicians want them to lend to. This is inflationary. This is not like the other 3 cycles where you had credit contracting, you had the price of money rising, you had people talking about, inflationary problems. So again, this is why I think the 4-year cycle is not applicable in this particular situation. How long do I think it going? I think we top somewhere in 2027. And the catalyst for that is the rhetoric coming from Team Blue Democrat in the United States and any opposition party around the world, basically like, we have to do something about this inflation. Now, they're never going to do anything about it, but they're politicians. They have to campaign on the other side and get people to vote for them. And so the other position to take is, they're printing all this money. That's why your grocery bill's up 30%, but your wages are only up 10%, all valid points. And that's what's going to scare investors. Maybe they're serious about it this time. Maybe they are going to do austerity. Maybe they are going to try to rectify, this fiat debasement scheme. And that doubt will lead to a correction in the markets
in 2027.
That's my mental model. I'll update it as frequently as words come out of my mouth, but that's how I'm looking at it.
The money printers aren't stopping, and Arthur Hayes thinks that's our signal. As fiat burns, Bitcoin rises. If you found this breakdown insightful, hit subscribe and join our Telegram group for daily macro and crypto updates you won't find anywhere else. Until next time, stay sharp, stay sovereign, and keep stacking.